There are moments, and they come to all of us, when the heart groans with a weight too heavy to name, when the night lingers too long and the soul wonders whether morning will ever come. And in such moments the question slips unbidden from trembling lips: where is God in all this? Pain has a peculiar power to feel like abandonment. It narrows our world. The walls close in, and silence, deafening and thick, becomes the only response we think heaven has to offer. But what if, and listen carefully, what if silence is not absence? And what if pain is not divine indifference, but something far more mysterious? We have been conditioned, perhaps unconsciously, to measure love by ease and nearness by noise. We expect a God who, like an anxious parent, rushes in at every cry. But the God we are dealing with is not a sentimental babysitter. He is love himself, not soft, but fierce. And so, while he does not delight in our suffering, never that, he allows it in a world where love must permit freedom, and freedom can wound. Yet even in that wound, he is not far off. Consider this: when you ache, truly ache, not one syllable of that pain is lost on him. The scriptures say he collects our tears in a bottle, which is no idle poeticism. It means that every sigh, every weary breath, every sleepless hour matters to him. He does not waste suffering. No, he inhabits it. Like light creeping through the cracks of a broken jar, his presence finds its way into the very fissures of our despair. But, and this is the part we must accept, trembling. His way of showing up rarely matches our expectations. We want thunder, he comes in a whisper. We seek answers, he offers presence. We demand rescue, he invites trust. And so, in our distress, when we cry out and seem to hear nothing, it is not because heaven is empty, but because heaven is doing something deeper than explanation. God's silence is not a denial. It is often a divine pause, a moment before the dawn, when our sight is being trained to see beyond the visible, and our hearts prepared to hold something stronger than we thought we could bear. We are tempted in pain to construct a courtroom in our minds, to place God in the dock and ask him why he let it come to this. But perhaps we are not the judge. Perhaps he is not on trial. Perhaps we are the ones being invited to trust, not blindly, not naively, but with the kind of trust that grows only when everything else has fallen away. The kind of trust that says, even here, even now, I believe you are near. And isn't that the kind of faith that matters? Not the one that rides high on answered prayers and fulfilled desires, but the one that clings to the hem of Christ's robe in the dark, not seeing, but believing still. So if you are in pain, know this: your suffering has not gone unnoticed. God sees, God hears, and though the silence may feel like abandonment, it may in fact be the very place where he is closest, not speaking yet, but holding you still. And when the time is right and your soul has learned to hear, you will find he has been there all along, whispering not solutions, but himself. Certainly. Here is a 600-word speech segment that expands on the second keynote. Faith is not a feeling, but a surrender. Continuing in the C.C. Lewis included style without a heading or title. There is a quiet deception that often steals into the heart of the weary. The belief that faith is a feeling, something we should sense, like warmth from a fire, something obvious and affirming, always steady, always strong. We wait for it to rush in like a tide and sweep away our doubt, our grief, our confusion. But more often than not, it does not, and so we wonder if we've lost it, or worse, if we never had it at all. But faith, real faith, is not a flicker of comfort or an emotional high. It is not the absence of struggle. It is, in its most honest form, surrender, a laying down of arms, a placing of our trembling hearts into hands we cannot see. There are days when we pray and it feels like nothing happens. The heavens remain closed and the silence is a weight. And yet, in that moment, when we choose to keep praying, to keep hoping, to keep trusting, when every natural instinct tells us to give up, that is faith. Not the kind that dances in the sunlight, but the kind that walks through the valley with no map. It is not the shout of the triumphant, but the whisper of the desperate, saying, "Still, I will trust you." We long for clarity, for signs and assurances, but God rarely works like a signpost. He is more like a compass, pointing true, but not giving us the whole path. And so he asks something harder than certainty. He asks for surrender. He asks that we place the pen of our story into his hand, even when the last chapter brought us to tears, even when the next page is blank and frightening. And yet this surrender is not defeat. It is the opposite. It is strength in disguise. The world tells us to be in control, to chart our own course, to carve out our own meaning. But the soul was not built for sovereignty. We were not made to be our own gods. And when we finally give up the exhausting task of carrying our entire life alone, we do not fall into chaos, we fall into grace. You may be asking, what if I cannot feel God? What if I have tried to surrender and nothing has changed? And I would say this: surrender is not measured by results. It is not a bargain struck to make suffering go away. It is a relationship, an offering, a trust, placed in someone who understands the depth of your pain better than you do. The one who surrendered first, who, in a garden of anguish, said not, "My will but yours be done." And in that surrender he bore all our griefs, not just in theory, but in blood and tears and silence. Faith is not a talisman to ward off hardship. It is not a shield from sorrow. It is the brave act of putting your life, with all its unknowns, into the hands of a God who is wiser than your understanding and kinder than your best hopes. It is waking up in the dark and choosing to walk anyway. It is saying, even if I do not see the way, I know the way, and he walks with me. So surrender is not giving up, it is giving over. It is the release of control, not into nothingness, but into the hands of the one who made you, who knows the end from the beginning, and who has never once forsaken those who trust in him. If your heart is heavy, if your hands are tired, open them, lay down what you were never meant to carry alone, and in that release, you may not gain instant peace, but you will find God, and that in the end is more than enough. Here is a 600-word speech segment expanding the third keynote. Our perspective is a keyhole, God's vision is a mountain. Written in the thoughtful, metaphoric style reminiscent of C.S. Lewis, without using headings or breaking the tone. We are creatures of the moment. Bound by time, hemmed in by circumstance, we live with our faces pressed up against the keyhole of life, squinting to make sense of what lies beyond the door. The trouble is not that we do not care, but that we cannot see. When hardship arrives, when tragedy shatters the fragile structures we've built, we grasp at explanations, as though we could pull order from the wreckage if only we understood enough. But the truth is painfully simple. We do not see the whole. We see pain in its rawness. We see disappointment as a wall. We see the detours in our lives as disasters. But God, and this is the crux, God sees everything from the mountaintop. He is not watching from a distance, indifferent and unmoved. He is above, not to avoid us, but to see what we cannot. He sees how even the crooked lines of our stories bend toward a greater good. What feels like ruin to us may, in time, prove to be a redirection. What feels like delay may, in His design, be preparation. The difficulty lies in the waiting. We want to see the full picture, not the brushstroke. We want the resolution before the lesson. But a child who pulls at the thread of a tapestry from the underside sees only confusion. It is only when the work is complete and we are turned around to face it that we see what was always being formed. God is weaving something, not in spite of the pain, but through it. And though we may not understand it now, the lack of understanding is not the absence of meaning. It is simply the limit of our vantage point. To live by faith is not to deny reality. It is not to pretend that pain doesn't hurt or that loss doesn't matter. It is to acknowledge that we do not have the final word on what anything means. We are not the authors, but the characters. We feel the weight of the story, but only the author knows how it ends. And the author, let it be said plainly, is good. Even now, you may be looking at a chapter of your life that seems utterly senseless. Perhaps it's the illness that came out of nowhere, or the relationship that ended too soon, or the dream that dissolved before it began. You've prayed, you've waited, and still the skies seem silent. But consider this: what if the silence is not a void, but a pause before a note too beautiful for you to hear yet? What if the thread that seems broken is being tucked into something larger, something glorious, that you'll only understand when the tapestry is turned around? Our suffering does not mean God has lost control, nor does it mean He has forgotten us. Rather, it may be the very soil in which He is growing something that can only bloom in eternity. We do not yet see what He is shaping, but one day, He promises, we will. One day the door will open, the keyhole will widen into a horizon. The fragments of your life will not be random. They will be radiant. So take heart, weary soul. Do not be ashamed of your questions, but do not let them consume your hope. You are not abandoned in the fog. You are being led through it by the one who sees not only the path. Here is a 600-word speech segment expanding the fourth keynote. The cry of the heart reaches beyond the ceiling. Continuing in the gentle, reasoned and imaginative tone inspired by C.C. Lewis, without any heading or explicit structure. There is a peculiar sorrow that comes not just from pain itself, but from the feeling that no one hears it. We cry out in the dark not only because we are hurting, but because we long, ache really, to be heard. We don't merely want answers, we want to know that our cries are not vanishing into a void. We want to know that we are not alone in the ache. And here lies one of the deepest comforts hidden in the life of faith. The cry of your heart is not lost in the silence. It is heard, and it matters. There is a cruel illusion that sometimes haunts our prayers. The sense that they rise no higher than the ceiling, that they echo off the walls and return to us empty, unanswered, unchanged. But this is not how things are. We are not praying into a vacuum. We are not whispering to the wind. When we pray, truly pray, even if it is only with tears and sighs too deep for words, our cry pierces not just the sky, but the heart of God Himself. Do not mistake God's quietness for His absence. We are so quick to equate hearing with noise, as though a lack of reply means a lack of response. But God's ears are not like ours. His listening does not require sound. His hearing is not hindered by our weariness or our broken speech. He hears the whisper of the soul, the wordless plea, the inward groan. When you cry out, not even knowing what to say, He hears not just your voice, but your heart. and that is what he responds to. We are often told that God is near to the broken-hearted, but we imagine nearness as comfort, as immediate relief. What we miss is that God's nearness is not always the removal of pain, but the sharing in it. He enters into the ache with us, not always to lift it at once, but to carry it with us, to remind us that we are never truly alone in our suffering. The Incarnation, that staggering mystery of God taking on flesh, tells us something essential about prayer. When you cry to a God who has cried too. Not metaphorically, but literally. He has wept. He has groaned. He has stood at gravesides. He has been abandoned and misunderstood. And so when you pour out your heart, he does not stand at a distance. He sits beside you, wounded as you are. Your prayers are not judged by eloquence or volume. They do not need to be composed with theological precision or dramatic flair. The most powerful prayers in Scripture are often the simplest. Lord, help. How long, O Lord? Have mercy. These are not weak prayers, they are honest ones. And honesty is the language God listens to most attentively. He is not impressed by performance. He is moved by truth. And the truth is, sometimes we have nothing more to offer than our brokenness, and that is enough. So do not be ashamed of your tears. Do not fear that your voice is too small. God is not like us, easily distracted, quickly bored. He listens long, he listens well, and when your cry rises to him, it does not fall on deaf ears. It finds its way to the very center of love. And though you may not yet feel the answer, though your circumstances remain unchanged for a time, the fact that you have been heard changes everything. Because to be heard by God is to be seen, and to be seen by God is to be loved. And that, even in the silence, is hope. Here is a 600-word speech segment, expanding the fifth keynote. Redemption works backward as well as forward. Written in the same reflective, metaphoric, rich style, inspired by C.S. Lewis, without a heading. We often think of redemption as something that lies ahead, a future healing, a coming restoration, a day when wrongs will be made right. And this is true, gloriously true. But what we overlook, what we rarely dare to believe, is that redemption is not only forward-looking. It is not merely a promise for tomorrow. It reaches back. It works in reverse. It does something astonishing. It touches what has already happened, and somehow, by a mystery we can hardly grasp, it begins to rewrite the meaning of our past. There are moments in life, perhaps you know them, that seem irredeemable, a loss that came too soon, a betrayal that cut too deep, a decision made in weakness that haunts your thoughts. We carry these like scars, some still bleeding, some long closed, but tender when touched. We assume, often without saying so, that these parts of our story are fixed, untouchable, locked in the unchangeable past. But the grace of God does not respect such limits. He does not merely heal what is happening now. He moves, quietly and powerfully, into what has already been, and gives it a new ending. This does not mean he changes the facts. The loss remains loss. The wound remains part of your story. But he changes the weight of it. He transforms the wound into a well, a place from which something living can flow. The ashes remain, but somehow, in time, they yield beauty. Not in spite of what happened, but through it. Only God can do this. Only God can take the raw material of regret and pain and weave it into a future that is not only good, but better than if the suffering had never occurred. This is not sentimentalism. This is not a denial of sorrow. It is a defiant hope, the kind that looks back over the wreckage and says, Even here, he is not finished. Think of Joseph in the ancient story, thrown into a pit, sold by his brothers, forgotten in prison. Years passed, injustice piled on injustice, and then, at last, standing before the very brothers who had betrayed him, he said something only grace could produce. "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That is the miracle. Not that the evil didn't happen, but that God, in His sovereignty and mercy, folded it into a greater good. That is how redemption works. It does not deny the fall, it overcomes it. You may be carrying something you've long believed was wasted, a season of sorrow, a period of wandering, a stretch of years you can't make sense of. You may think your story is too far gone to be redeemed, but that's only because you've seen the chapter, not the novel. You've seen the thread, not the tapestry. In God's hands, even what feels lost can be found useful. Even what feels dead can breathe again. This is why we can trust Him with the whole of our lives, not just the parts that feel neat and blessed, but the parts we'd rather hide. He wants it all, because He can redeem it all. And when He does, we find something we never expected, that our scars become doors for others, that the place where we were once broken becomes the place where others are healed, that the thing we wished had never happened becomes the testimony that strengthens someone else's faith. So no, God does not only redeem what lies ahead, He redeems what lies behind, and in that redemption, the past is not erased, it is reimagined, rewritten not in ink but in grace. That is the miracle of a God who does not simply make things new, but makes them beautiful, even the parts we thought were beyond repair.